Thanks, Jazz. And now we have Ben Davis, who is a member of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty in New York.
Right. Give it up for Ben Davis. Can people hear me? Yeah. So Jazz talked about the new Jim Crow and a little bit what it looks like, and I know that Daryl, after me, is going to talk a little bit even more concretely what it looks like. And I guess what I'm going to present you with is something maybe a little bit more boring, really, or modest, which is, I think sometimes I find, not always, but sometimes I find that it's easier to get people to kind of agree that this whole system needs to be thrown out than it is to kind of think about what does the nitty-gritty look like? Like, how do we kind of modestly move forward towards that goal? So I am going to talk a little bit about what it's looked like for the last year or so to be organized in the campaign to end the new Jim Crow in New York. Both Lee and I have volunteered as representatives of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty and as part of the campaign to end the new Jim Crow with Jazz and a team of other people that bring together different groups in New York. Before I do that, I just want to say two things about thoughts that have been inspired to me by this idea of the new Jim Crow, which comes from Michelle Alexander's great book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And I think that's really put a name on something that people have been thinking about. And I'm sure people who've been activists have heard the discussions. But for me, it's provoked two thoughts. The first is, if there was an old Jim Crow and it took a civil rights movement to overturn the old Jim Crow, then if we conceptualize the system of mass incarceration as a new Jim Crow, it follows we need a new civil rights movement that looks a little different because that system has taken on a different form. The system of racism, the system of oppression has taken on a different form, but it has to be a civil rights movement. To take a new civil rights movement to fight the new Jim Crow. And the second thing that it sort of helped me conceptualize or realize is that the idea of the new Jim Crow, it's not a poetic turn of phrase, not a metaphor, right? The old Jim Crow is about two different sets of laws, one for blacks and one for whites. And I do believe that the system oppresses the 99%, most of us, but I do think that, it's a very real thing that there are two different communities experience the law in this country differently. For some communities, police officers put on a nice face, it's like officer friendly, and for some communities, it's just unrelenting profiling, harassment, and that our society is segregated like that, and that for organizing a movement that raises real barriers because they're barriers of distrust, people have different experiences, and if we're going to build a new civil rights movement, we have to overcome those barriers because the old civil rights movement incorporated all kinds of people, of course led by African Americans, but drawing in students and activists of all kinds, and we need to figure out concretely how to get down to this fight. I've been involved, since I've been involved with the Campaign to Death Penalty, with various organizations, various sort of conferences, and it seems like it always comes up. It's like, we just all need to get together, and we all care about the same things. It always comes up, but then in practice, that's often very difficult. When you get down to do it, it's like, whoa, what actions do we agree on? What can we do? Often just very difficult. There are actual different perspectives, and that make this difficult. And some attention needs to be paid towards what structures, what forms actually make it possible to bring people together. So, in our modest way, what I am proud, well, it's still modest and flawed, and you should see the arguments we have. I am proud of the work we've done over the last year because, as modest as it is, for me, it's like the most concrete example of trying to figure out a way to solve these problems. So here's a little bit what it looked like. Inspired about a year ago or so, maybe more than that, a group of different people from different prisoner activist groups came together in New York, sort of led by Jazz and others out of Riverside Prison Ministries, with the idea, and including the Campaign to End the Death Penalty from very early on, with the idea to do an event with Michelle Alexander, the author of the book, and not just an event. I think most people, there's a major sentiment, like, we put on great events, we want to actually do something more than an event, something that will be like the launch pad for a movement. So over the course of 6 months, maybe more than that, we met on Fridays and worked on the logistical details of putting together an event with Michelle Alexander at Riverside Church that would be a launch pad for a campaign to end the new Jim Crow. And we finally did that event earlier this year. It was amazing. We had 800, 900 people there. It was packed. I was an usher, and I just couldn't, I was trying to find space for people. The fire marshal, people were saying they can't let anyone in the fire marshal. And it was a really inspiring event. Michelle spoke very, very well. What happened after that? Well, we had, as it turned out, in the course of planning this event, we had spent so much time talking about the logistics of putting it together that we hadn't talked about what that movement coming out of it would look like. So it came time to, the week before the event, and we had to say, well, we want to throw a meeting afterwards where people can come and we can invite them to join the campaign in New Jim Crow. And we realized, some people in the group felt very strongly, that we hadn't actually defined ourselves in a way where we could invite people together to do that. So in some ways, we had this great event, and then we got a ton of emails and brought a ton of people together, inspired a bunch of people, but we didn't have that next step to offer them. So that's a little lesson we learned. And we spent the next months, again, meeting on Friday nights, and in some cases on the weekends, debating points of unity, coming up together with a vision statement, a mission statement, and thinking about what kind of structures could unite people. And finally we sort of defined ourselves, and just to very briefly, we have sort of a working sort of group, we call it, that is sort of the people who've been organizing most consistently, or sort of like a steering committee. And then we decided we would have committees where people could be part of, that we'd invite people into. Anybody could come to the committees and be involved in their different ways, with their diverse perspectives and ideas in different things that they could initiate. So we have 6 committees: human rights, racial disparities, transformative justice, uniting communities, communications, and fundraising. So those are 6 different kind of groups that we could bring together. And then the anniversary of Attica was upon us, and Jazz and Lee and many others from our group were involved in organizing a wonderful event, Attica is all of us, that brought in a whole new crowd. So it's like sort of a do-over for us. It's a chance to learn from our Michelle Alexander event. And so at that event, by then we had this mission, and we had clear to make sure we got flyers into all the brochures for that event, that we had our team there waiting to talk to people, invite people to a campaign to end the new Jim Crow launch event afterwards, which happened to coincide very shortly after Troy Davis was executed. So in that case, we had a memorial service for Troy, and then afterwards people were invited to this launch event where we presented what we worked on, and we presented the committees, and we invited people to join. And I think people's experience of the event were a great number of people came out, then we broke down into our committees and talked as groups about what initiatives we could start working on together. And for me, it was very exciting and inspiring to see people